The wind howled like a banshee, whipping snow into a frenzy that blurred the city lights into hazy smears. I trudged through the storm, the frigid air biting at my face, a stark contrast to the sterile warmth of the limousine I'd abandoned moments ago. Inside, the sterile opulence mocked me with its emptiness. Even the latest model's heated seats couldn't thaw the icy fear gnawing at my soul. The doctor's words haunted me. 6 months. A mere sentence, a death knell to the carefully constructed life I'd built. The boardroom victories, the meticulously curated image, the penthouse meant to house a king felt like hollow facades now. I needed something real, something to anchor me before the tide washed everything away. Driven by a desperation I barely recognized, I found myself drawn to a quiet alleyway. Huddled in the shadows, barely visible beneath a thin blanket, was a figure. As I drew closer, the outlines resolved into a woman, bundled up against the cold, a small child shivering in her arms. Shame, hot and prickly, spread through me. This wasn't the carefully curated reality I inhabited. This was raw need, vulnerability laid bare in the harshest elements. Hesitantly, I broke the silence. "Excuse me," I rasped, the words unfamiliar on my tongue. The woman flinched, pulling the blanket tighter around the child. Her eyes, guarded and wary, met mine. "Can I help you?" Her voice was rough, raspy with the sting of the cold. The boy, no more than 5, peeked out from behind her, his big eyes filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. "It's cold," I mumbled, feeling hopelessly inadequate. "You and your son could come inside, get warm." Distrust warred with desperation in her eyes. "Who are you?" "Stephen," I replied, extending a hand. "Stephen Kensington." The name meant little in this bleak scenario. She studied me for a long, tense moment, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't need your charity, mister." "It's not charity," I insisted, a strange urgency rising within me. "It's just the cold. No one should be out here like this." Her gaze softened slightly, but doubt lingered. The boy tugged at her sleeve, his voice barely audible. "Mommy, are we going inside?" A tremor ran through her, and I saw the weight of her decision bear down on her. For a child's sake, she was willing to trust a stranger. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Kensington, but just for tonight." Relief washed over me, interwoven with a dawning awareness. Helping them wasn't just about assuaging my guilt. It was a flicker of life in the face of my own mortality. Perhaps, in saving them from the cold, I was saving myself from something far worse. As they followed me into the opulent warmth of my penthouse, I knew this was just the beginning. We walked in silence, the woman's eyes flitting over the gleaming surfaces, the echo of my own privilege reverberating in the air. Finally, the boy broke the silence, his voice wide-eyed with wonder. "Is this your castle, mister?" A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Something like that," I replied, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Welcome to our temporary shelter. What's your name?" "Thomas," he whispered, shyly holding out a small, cold hand. "Well, Thomas," I said, shaking his hand. "Tonight, this castle has 2 new knights to protect it from the blizzard." A hesitant smile lit up his face, a beacon of hope in the storm that raged both outside and within me. And as we settled them in, the sterile penthouse began to feel a little less like a gilded cage and a little more like a home. The penthouse shimmered with an alien warmth, a stark contrast to the biting cold Betty and Thomas had just escaped. Yet, the initial relief quickly dissolved into a tense standoff. Betty, distrust etched deep in her tired eyes, stood stiffly in the middle of the living room, clutching Thomas close. The opulent surroundings screamed wealth, a language far removed from their struggles for survival. "This is a lot," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Shame gnawed at Stephen. The plush carpets, the glittering artwork, spoke of a life untouched by hardship, a life Betty likely viewed with suspicion, if not outright resentment. "I understand," he began, trying to find his voice. "This isn't what you're used to, but..." "Used to?" Betty interrupted, bitterness creeping into her tone. "You think living on the streets is a choice? Something people get used to?" We were just trying to get through the night, not become guests in some museum. Thomas, sensing the rising tension, whimpered and buried his face in her shoulder. Stephen's heart ached. This wasn't about justifying his wealth. It was about offering compassion, a lifeline in the storm they faced. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Listen, I don't expect you to understand where I'm coming from, but please, let me help. You and Thomas don't deserve to be out there in the cold. Betty's gaze softened slightly, but skepticism remained. Help how? With another handout? I'm not a charity case, Mr. Kensington. It's not about charity, Stephen insisted, sincerity lacing his voice. Think of it as hospitality. I have spare rooms, plenty of food. Let me offer you shelter, a chance to rest and gather your strength. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a war between exhaustion and pride. Then, Thomas spoke up, his small voice breaking the silence. Mommy, can we stay? Just for a night? Please? His innocent plea cut through the tension like a knife. Betty looked at her son, his vulnerability mirroring her own. A sigh escaped her lips, heavy with weariness. All right, she finally conceded, her voice barely above a whisper. One night, but only because Thomas doesn't deserve to sleep on the streets. A wave of relief washed over Stephen. It wasn't a complete surrender, but it was a start. As he showed them to a guest room, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps, by helping them, he could find a way to mend the cracks in his own fractured existence. He didn't know what the future held, but as he tucked Thomas into bed, listening to his soft snores, a new chapter began. The opulent penthouse, once a monument to success, now held the promise of something more meaningful: compassion, connection, and perhaps a chance at redemption. The sterile silence of the mansion had always been Stephen's comfort zone, a reflection of his carefully controlled life. Now, it felt suffocating. Betty's presence, though initially hesitant, brought an unexpected melody to the symphony of silence. She moved with quiet efficiency, dusting away not just cobwebs, but years of emotional neglect. Thomas, with his infectious laughter and curious questions, became a whirlwind of energy, exploring the hidden corners of the mansion like a miniature explorer. One morning, Stephen found Betty in the kitchen, meticulously chopping vegetables. The rhythmic sound seemed to chase away the shadows in his heart. Hesitantly, he joined her. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Betty raised an eyebrow, the glint of a smile in her eyes. "I may not have lived in a palace, Mr. Kensington, but I can handle a carrot." Stephen chuckled, surprised by the ease of their exchange. "Sorry, couldn't resist. What are you making?" "Soup," she replied. "Something warm and hearty for Thomas. He needs his strength." As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence settled between them. Stephen learned about Betty's struggle to survive after fleeing an abusive relationship, the constant fear for her son's safety fueling her resilience. He, in turn, shared fragments of his lonely life, the emptiness that success couldn't fill. Later, after dinner, Thomas tugged on Stephen's sleeve. "Can you read me a story, mister?" Stephen, initially unsure, found himself drawn to the child's eager eyes. In the dusty library, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, he read a tale of adventure, his voice filling the cavernous room with an unfamiliar warmth. As Thomas drifted off to sleep, tucked away in a luxurious guest room, Stephen felt a shift within himself. This wasn't just charity, it was a connection, a shared humanity that transcended his gilded cage. One afternoon, Thomas led Stephen to the neglected garden, overgrown with weeds. "Can we make it pretty?" the boy asked, his eyes shining with hope. Stephen, touched by his enthusiasm, felt a spark ignite within him. Together, they spent hours clearing the debris, planting seeds, and dreaming of blooming flowers. As they worked, Stephen found himself laughing, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't known he craved. The garden, once a symbol of neglect, blossomed with life, mirroring the unexpected harmony blossoming within him. One evening, sitting by the fireplace, Betty's gaze lingered on his face. "Thank you, Stephen," she said softly, Not just for the shelter, but for everything. You've brought light into our lives. Stephen felt a lump form in his throat. It's mutual, he stammered. You and Thomas. You've changed things here. Made this place feel... He paused, searching for the right words. Alive. Betty smiled, a genuine warmth reflecting in her eyes. Maybe, she whispered, we all needed a little change. In the flickering firelight, their connection deepened, a bond forged in unexpected circumstances. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Stephen felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in helping others find their way out of the cold, he might just find his own path to healing, acceptance, and maybe even love. The doctor's visit loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon, yet a different light now shone within Stephen's apartment. Laughter and the clatter of cutlery replaced the chilling silence. Thomas, with his boundless energy, was a constant whirl of questions and explorations, leaving trails of discarded socks and giggles in his wake. Even Betty, initially wary, moved with a quiet confidence, transforming neglected corners into spaces that hummed with life. One morning, Stephen found her in the study, meticulously organizing his chaotic files. Just some spring cleaning, she explained, a playful glint in her eyes. You're certainly doing a better job than any assistant I've ever had, Stephen admitted, a smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps some things benefit from a different touch, she replied, her voice surprisingly gentle. Their days were filled with an unexpected routine. Stephen, inspired by Thomas's enthusiasm, found himself spending less time at the office and more in the garden, teaching the boy the names of vegetables and the joy of nurturing life from the soil. Betty, a natural chef, whipped up meals that spoke of comfort and care, filling the apartment with the aroma of home. One evening, as they sat around the fireplace, sipping tea, a comfortable silence settled. Thomas, curled up on Betty's lap, was fast asleep. Looking at her, her face bathed in the warm firelight, Stephen felt a pang of unfamiliar emotions. He seems happier here, he ventured, the words catching in his throat. He wouldn't be anywhere else, Betty replied, her voice soft. You've given us both a safe haven, Mr. Kensington. Stephen, he corrected gently. Call me Stephen. She hesitated, then nodded. Stephen, thank you, but what about you? Are you happy? The question hung heavy in the air. He hadn't considered it before, but now, staring into her honest eyes, the truth came rushing in. I don't know, he admitted, surprised by the raw vulnerability in his voice. But with you two here, things feel different, less empty. A smile played on Betty's lips. Maybe, she said softly, helping others is the best way to help yourself. Her words resonated deeply. Helping Thomas and Betty wasn't just charity. It was a lifeline thrown to himself. He saw it in the reflection of their joy in his eyes, a warmth that chased away the loneliness that had gnawed at him for years. In the ensuing weeks, Stephen took action. He contacted social services, helping Betty secure a job and an apartment. He enrolled Thomas in school, watching the boy's face light up with the excitement of learning. He wasn't just rebuilding their lives, he was rebuilding his own, fueled by a newfound purpose. One day, as Betty packed their few belongings, a tear rolled down her cheek. We can't stay here forever, Stephen, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I know, he replied, a bittersweet ache in his chest. But you'll always have a place here, a friend. She looked at him, her gaze tender. We already do, Stephen, and you have a future full of possibilities, more than you even know. Her words sparked a flicker of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to face it. The seeds of transformation, planted in the fertile ground of compassion and connection, had begun to sprout, promising a harvest of love, acceptance, and a life far richer than anything he could have imagined. As they embraced goodbye, he knew this wasn't the end, but a new beginning, a testament to the transformative power of human connection, even in the face of uncertainty. Weeks had passed since Betty and Thomas left the penthouse, carrying a piece of Stephen's heart with them. The apartment, once echoing with their laughter, held a poignant silence. Yet, it wasn't the same chilling silence as before. The echo of their presence lingered, a warmth that chased away the shadows of his former emptiness. Stephen's life had undergone a seismic shift. His days were no longer dictated by boardroom battles and the pursuit of wealth. He volunteered at a local children's shelter, finding solace in the wide-eyed smiles and innocent questions. He nurtured the garden, each blooming flower a reminder of the unexpected beauty that blossomed from unlikely seeds. One sunny afternoon, he received a call. Betty's voice, filled with nervous excitement, announced a surprise visit. He rushed to their new apartment, his heart pounding with anticipation. The door creaked open, revealing Betty, a radiant smile lighting up her face. On her hip sat Thomas, clutching a hand-drawn picture. "Look what we made for you, Mr. Stephen," Thomas announced, his eyes shining with pride. The picture, a colorful jumble of lines and shapes, depicted the three of them holding hands. Stephen's eyes stung with emotion. It wasn't the artistic merit that moved him, but the sentiment, the unspoken truth it conveyed. "It's beautiful," he choked out, pulling them into a warm embrace. The afternoon unfolded in a whirlwind of laughter and stories. Thomas, fueled by endless energy, explored the apartment, while Stephen and Betty settled into comfortable conversation. "We wouldn't be here without you, Stephen," Betty said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You gave us a chance, a hope." "It was a two-way street," Stephen countered, his voice sincere. "You brought life back into this place, reminded me of what truly matters." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. It wasn't just about gratitude, it was about a bond forged in hardship, a connection that transcended circumstance. "How's the new apartment?" Stephen asked, changing the subject. Betty's smile dimmed slightly. "It's small, but we manage. Thomas loves having his own room." He noticed a flicker of worry in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" Hesitantly, she confided in him, sharing the challenges of getting back on her feet, the constant struggle to make ends meet. Stephen listened intently, his heart aching for her unspoken worry. Without hesitation, he made an offer. "I have an empty guest room at the penthouse. You and Thomas are always welcome to stay for as long as you need." Betty's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and conflict playing on her face. "But, Stephen, I can't..." "Think of it as an investment," he interrupted gently. "You've invested your faith, your kindness in me. Now let me invest in yours." He saw understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by a hesitant smile. "Thank you, Stephen. You truly are a good man." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not good, just trying to be better. And who knows, maybe with you and Thomas around, I just might succeed." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, a new chapter began. The lines between benefactor and beneficiary blurred, replaced by a shared journey of healing, support, and perhaps even family. The seeds of compassion had blossomed into a garden of love, reminding Stephen that life's greatest treasures weren't measured in dollars or achievements, but in the connections that enriched the soul, leaving him hopeful for a future far richer than he could have ever imagined. The doctor's words, like a dark echo, still lingered in the back of his mind. 6 months. Yet, as Stephen stood on his penthouse balcony, overlooking the vibrant city stretched beneath a star-dusted sky, a different picture painted itself in his heart. The apartment, once a monument to sterile success, pulsed with the warmth of life. Laughter filtered through the open windows, the sound of Thomas's joyful squeals, chasing away the shadows of his former isolation. Betty, standing beside him, rested a hand on his arm, her smile mirroring the twinkle in the city lights. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she remarked, her voice soft with contentment. Stephen nodded, gazing not at the cityscape, but at the woman who had unexpectedly rewritten his script. More beautiful than I ever imagined. The journey hadn't been easy. Helping Betty and Thomas had opened windows in his own life, exposing vulnerabilities he'd long kept hidden. Facing his past demons, the pain of a failed marriage, the guilt of neglecting his own happiness had been a painful catharsis. Yet, with Betty's unwavering support and Thomas's innocent acceptance, he found the courage to heal, to forgive himself. "Remember when I first came here?" Betty asked, her voice tinged with amusement. A suspicious, scared wreck of a woman? Stephen chuckled, recalling the wary, guarded stranger he'd met in the snowstorm. And now you're... He paused, searching for the right words. Stronger, happier, a friend, a part of our family. Family, Betty repeated, the word warm on her lips. It's funny how life throws curveballs, isn't it? You thought you were helping us, but you saved yourself too. He looked at her, the depth of her words settling in his heart. He hadn't just helped them, they had helped him rediscover the joy of human connection, the love he hadn't realized he craved. The legacy he was leaving wouldn't be measured in boardroom conquests or penthouse views, but in the lives he touched, the love he shared. I wouldn't trade this for anything, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Neither would I, Betty replied, squeezing his hand. But there's more to your story, Stephen. Don't let fear confine you. Live the rest of your days with the same courage you showed us. Her words struck a chord. Fear had dictated his life for too long, the fear of failure, of vulnerability. But looking at Betty and Thomas, their faces reflecting his own newfound hope, he knew she was right. You're right, he said, a newfound determination settling in his eyes. There's still time to write a different ending. They stood in silence for a while, sharing a silent understanding. The future remained uncertain, yet he faced it with a clear heart, his legacy no longer a gilded cage, but a symphony of love, compassion, and the courage to live, truly live, until the very last note. As the dawn painted the sky with hopeful hues, Stephen knew this was just the beginning. He walked back inside, hand in hand with Betty, Thomas skipping ahead, humming a tune. The penthouse, once a symbol of lonely success, now echoed with the vibrant melody of life, a testament to the transformative power of human connection, reminding him that even in the face of mortality, love and second chances bloomed in the most unexpected places.